To die, I went into the woods. Then I discovered that death is not the only fate in this universe. I'm Gwen, and I've kind of wanted to kill myself for as long as I can remember. It hasn't been easy for me, and I didn't have the best childhood. Thus, the ride hasn't been that enjoyable. You are aware of the life I have led. I was raised in British Columbia, Canada, close to Vanderhoff. Being First Nation mates has only ever meant so much to me. It's more a reflection of my mother. My mother was really abusive, and my father passed away when I was a little child. Her boyfriends were the only guys I ever had as a child, and they had all made attempts to get close to me. Even as a child, I was aware that this only ever made Mom mad at me, which is crazy, but it didn't make her hatred any less manageable. In any case, despite my admiration for their beauty, I tended to avoid them because I had no idea what a nice man looked like. It never worked out when I tried to have a few boyfriends. Between that and a general lack of knowledge about proper socialization, I had very few friends and was a complete recluse. Throughout my life, I battled depression and experienced difficulties in the majority of my relationships. I decided I had had enough of everything when I went to the woods. As you can see, I didn't and I doubt I'll ever have the courage to go out on my own. However, since many people disappear in the woods, I reasoned that I could hike out by myself and never return. Perfect, huh? Yes. I mean, I know how absurd I am, but it goes beyond than you might think. Because I have a strong and rooted sense for self-preservation, which is the reason I lack the courage to do it myself. Before I ever heard anything horrific, I had made roughly 6 of these foolish outings. When I did, I took off running. What sense does that make, really? I guess it made about as much sense as carrying on, which I obviously did. Nothing really happened until I set out on autopilot with the full expectation that I would return. And I ended myself getting completely lost. I had a tendency to simply go in any direction that caught my attention. I would occasionally forge a pathway through the bush, and other times stick to a well-traveled path. However, this time, it was October, there was snow all over, and I couldn't tell if I was on track. As previously said, I had only ever taken these treks when the ground was clear and was operating automatically. Thus, I was merely traveling. These hikes, which were essentially just lengthy nature walks, are what I believe truly changed my perspective on wishing for anything to occur. During them, I witnessed so much beauty in nature that, at the end of most of them, I felt better. Additionally, I believe that by the time what had transpired, I had just concluded that it was something I did and not some crazy, foolish scheme to end my own life. In any case, I was wearing jeans, strolling around in the snow in the incorrect shoes, and not really paying attention to my destination. I saw and heard much, many birds on these strolls, and paid close attention to keeping an eye out for them. Every type of sparrow was present. Jays, chicks with black caps and stars. However, I was hoping to see a black-capped chickadee again because I had seen one the last time I went out. After that, I saw 2 trees I had never seen before. When I turned around, I saw that I had no idea where I was. To my credit, I didn't freak out. I simply made an effort to go back and find a location that I knew better. After what seemed like a very long time, I followed my own trail back to a creek that I remembered crossing, but where my footprints ended, there were no matching tracks on the opposite side. The creek was rough, but not frozen. I also recall hopping over it. However, I was unable to cross the brook due to the stones there. Therefore, I was unable to cross there. I frantically searched the creek for my tracks on the other side, but I was unable to see anything that even vaguely resembled tracks. And I was unsure what to do. So I considered simply crossing there and finding out how to get home once I completed it. But if I could prevent it, I really didn't want to get wet. If I fell into the creek in my jeans and walking shoes, the trip would not be enjoyable. I made the decision to follow the creek till I came upon my footprints. I followed the creek west since I thought I remembered coming from the east. In all honesty, I could have easily, and probably did, come from the west because I wasted the remaining daylight hours looking for my missing tracks without success. The fact that no one knew I was out there was just one of the many reasons I felt like such a fool. I jumped at every sound because I kept thinking that what I had originally planned was going to happen. I began to feel quite frightened when twilight shone through the trees and covered the entire region in a faint blue haze. But at the same time, I kept somewhat to myself. I always persuaded myself that since this was what I wanted, I had no right to be afraid. I was depressed because I knew no one would come looking for me, but I also felt like such a fool. Neither my mother nor my pals from the fair weather. Thus, everything appeared more bleak as it grew darker. I spent what felt like more time than it should have, because I roamed in the dusky light of the blue-gray sky. And suddenly it was nightfall before I even knew it had happened. Even the snow's whiteness appeared black to me, and the birds had long since stopped singing. Although I was too young to have a cell phone of my own, I would have used the light on the phone, and my mother never purchased one for me. Around this time, dusk began to creep in. 5 feet in front of my face was all that was visible to me. Since I only needed to twist my ankle or something at that moment, I was taking my time. I can recall at least 3 instances where I nearly collided with a tree. On one of those occasions, I had dodged under a huge branch at the last second, but I stumbled and fell forward, landing face first in the snow. I rolled into a sitting position and spat out leaves and snow. Took a time to consider my circumstances. In theory, I should certainly start yelling for assistance, but I was also unsure of who was listening, which had been the original purpose. I was chickening out now, though. I was aware of how much of a hoser I was at the time. I considered simply hunkering down beneath the tree where I was sitting till daybreak. However, I was also aware that I was likely to get so cold that it will likely freeze. I remember crying a lot at that point, but I didn't care how loud I became because I was either dying or maybe someone would hear me and come to my aid. However, nobody showed up, not even to murder me. I believe I released a lot of things I had been suppressing as I was sitting there crying for a bit. My mother, missing my father, and being unable to locate or attend the connections that I yearned for. Everything just poured out my eyes, onto the snow, and onto the ground. I recall thinking I was the only one in the world as I sat there. And I pictured the tree I was sitting beneath coming to life out of nowhere, draping a branch across my shoulder like a shoulder brace. I felt better after this, but I was also a little alarmed. Then I thought about how the tree would respond if I rejected it. I cried more after feeling horrible once more. I was and still am a fairly creative person. A wind gust blew through the region as I was bracing myself for my fictitious oral snub, sending a chill through me. I shuddered, trying to figure out how I could make a fire. However, I ought to have started searching for drywood sooner if I had intended to do that. It's crazy because I was unsure whether to laugh uncontrollably or despair because it seemed like my grand plan was going perfectly. The wind swirled around something in the distance that created a strange sound as it moved over and through the trees. It came from off to the side and was the distinct jingle of a pine cone wind chime. My privilege. I ventured to hope that I might have actually arrived closer to town than I had anticipated, as a chime like that had to be connected to some sort of structure, or at least near one. I stood up and started walking in the direction of the chime's sound, hoping that a new breeze would blow at each step to assist me find my way. Another wind gust, and the chimes tinkling, closer this time. I turned to go where I had heard them. The chimes were practically exactly behind me when the wind blew for the 3rd time, so I must have overshot. With a start, I spun around and crept ahead through the pitch-black darkness until I eventually spotted a short flight of wooden stairs. When I got closer to the building and saw that it was a cabin, my heart skipped a beat and simultaneously plummeted. I was overjoyed that a cabin like the one I was gazing at suggested that I was far from town, but I had found some sort of shelter. I was also kind of screwed if the door was locked. As I had anticipated, nobody was home when I knocked politely. The entrance door was indeed locked when I tried it. I looked beneath the front mat, but I couldn't find a key. I looked through the windows nearby, but I couldn't see anything inside. I also attempted to open the windows, but they quickly became stuck. Then, in an attempt to locate another way in, I went around the cabin, keeping my hand on it the whole time to avoid getting lost. I walked around the cabin and noticed another building nearby that, in the dark, appeared to be some sort of wooden shed. Knowing that I would probably have to rough it, I took note of it. If I couldn't find a way into the cabin, I'd be out there. I thought I spotted movement near the shed as I was passing it. So I turned to go see a black shadow retreat behind the open doors. At that moment, I made the decision that I needed to enter the cabin immediately, if only to place a door and some space between me and the person or thing that had just entered the woodshed. At that point, I sort of ran around the opposite side of the cabin, leaving one hand coming into contact with the building. I didn't know what I was going to do, but it probably entailed smashing open a window and taking some sort of nice decoration. I was walking down the cabin side when my hand came into contact with something that made me stop. I could feel the tube that was attached to the electrical outlet. It was strange to discover this because I didn't think this location would have electricity, but I became excited when I thought it might. After giving it some thought, I quickly pried out the plug based on my intuition. As I had anticipated, it had a levering give, and as I opened it and felt inside, I nearly yelled with delight as my fingers traced the edges of steel. I carefully extracted the key from its hiding spot and held it firmly in my palm before swiftly making my way back to the front door by tracing the exterior of the cabin. I nearly urinated when I heard someone whisper something behind me as I was leaving the phony outlet. Like it had caught me stealing, the voice was quiet, soft, and anxious, but all it said was no. Since the voice sounded feminine, I turned in the hopes that it was a person now, but nothing and no one were there. I should have approached the front stair railing, but I was too scared and just sprinted the remaining distance to the front of the cabin without touching it. My wrist broke against the banister as I yelled and rammed against it, but the terrible crunch of one of the spokes breaking away on my knee drowned out my noise. Even though I was in pain, I forced myself to turn around and go up the steps because I was too afraid to care. My fist had been squeezing the key the entire time, but when I reached the door, I located the handle once more and unlocked it. There were additional murmurs coming from the cabin side, and they seemed anxious. I located the keyhole with my thumb and slid it in. I was still concerned that it was whoever owned the damn cabin, so I turned my head when I clearly heard the word "stop" as the whispers came around the corner. And a woman's black silhouette was just beyond my field of vision. She had curves, and I could almost see that she had brown hair, so I knew it was a lady. I tried to look at her more closely by peering into the darkness, but I was unable to do so because her head raised and her large, bloodshot eyes gazed at me with a frantic, completely insane expression. Her eyes widened even more when I screamed and inserted the key into the lock. Her whispers echoed all the way up to the door, which I promptly latched after running inside and slamming it shut. I moved away from the entrance. The items I had stolen, even though I knew it was insufficient. When I rushed outside after unlocking the door, I nearly collided with a Jeep that had pulled up the short drive from the exit road behind it. Like a deer in headlights, I stood dumbfounded on the porch. I hadn't noticed anyone approaching, so I was really surprised and perplexed. Looking inside the Jeep, I moved forward and noticed a rather inside. He was a dashing man who appeared to be in his 40s. He was giving me a very concentrated look, and I believe I startled him a little. He rolled down his window when I smiled and waved. I laughed when the man in the Jeep asked if he could help me, and I said that he could. When he didn't, I attempted to describe what had happened, how I got lost and found the cabin, and inquired whether it belonged to him. I must have had one hairy night with those crazy people crawling around, he said, laughing as he got out of the Jeep and nodded, telling me it was. I tried to play it off by laughing back, but I became uncomfortable with the way he appeared to be aware of them. At that point, he took a little step toward them, placing one foot on the steps. Suddenly, behind him, both of the women from the night before showed up, staring at me with wide eyes. When I saw them, I nearly screamed, but they shook their heads. And I at last saw the truth in the daylight. The cheeks of the woman who had been in the loft were hacked out, and her mouth hung wide, showing that she had lost all of her teeth. Skin fragments were missing from all over her body. The incisions and lacerations on the other woman's body, which it had only seen in part the previous evening, were all re-stitched but still bled. Both women appeared to be out of breath and were as pale as snow. Within their mouths, I refrained from screaming, but my gaze gradually returned to the man, whose eyes had become larger and darker, like the eyes of a shark. He told me he had just arrived and wondered what the rush was when I asked if he could give me a ride into town. I informed him that I didn't want to cause trouble and that my mother would be concerned. Additionally, he asked whether I thought the couch was comfortable and said he would call for my mom shortly. Now that I was scared, I whispered that it was great as I searched for a direction to run in. With wide, scared eyes that suddenly seemed so terribly sad, the two women who stood behind him sadly shook their heads. The man laughed once more, and when I turned to face him, he smirked at me knowingly before grabbing my wrist and dragging me off the stairs. He gave me a forceful blow to the head after I let out the loudest scream I could. It simply caused me to sob even harder. He pulled me back to the cabin, toward the woodshed I had previously seen the woman speaking emerge from. I let out a loud cry, but he covered my lips with his hand while he cooed and referred to me as a good girl. It was this. I was going to die like this. I went to die in the woods. And it was going to be this way. I had simultaneously done far too many foolish things, and now I would have to pay the price. As my feet kicked up over the shed's edge, I began to cry. Additionally, I noticed chains hanging from the wall with knives on it. Ceiling. I was aware that it was over, and that's when I first heard a different voice. Let the girl go, RCMP, and show me your fucking hands. A man wearing a black tactical vest with the letters he yelled out emblazoned on it was standing just next to the cabin as I opened my eyes and peered out of the shed. He had a pistol raised at I was yelling at the guy to move away from me. In addition, he was the most exquisite object I had ever seen in my entire life. A hand grabbed my hair and jerked my head back just as I was about to get excited. However, the Mountie fired twice and released his hold on my hands before anything else could happen. Behind me, I heard and felt the Jeep guy collapse to the ground, and I knew he had passed away. All of that made my head spin, but not enough to prevent me from scurrying out of that shed and avoiding the Mountie and the man who had attacked me. The Mountie asked me whether I was okay after putting the man in handcuffs and introduced himself as Kyle. I recall staring at him in utter amazement and confusion. Sure, he was attractive and he looked great in the outfit, but more than that, he just showed from out of nowhere. In addition, he looked genuinely worried about me. In my entire life, no one had ever been so concerned about me. And I came to the realization that a good man looked like this. I asked Kyle how in the world he had found me and told him everything that had transpired. It comes out that he was in the region looking into another girl's disappearance with his team. As they interrogated individuals, a pair I occasionally took these short outings, according to one of them who knew. They were also searching for me since, when they questioned my mother, she acknowledged that I hadn't returned home. It was somewhat more strange and far more eerie how he himself discovered the cabin. Kyle's squad received allegations of a half-naked woman who was stuck on the neighboring access road while conducting their investigation. He went on to tell me about the whispering woman, saying that he had seen someone who suited the description turn down this driveway and thought he would find her, but instead he discovered me. It felt bad to lie to Kyle, so I told him the whole truth when he asked if I had seen the girl he described. I couldn't be dishonest with him, even though I knew it was crazy. Not after my life was spared by him. Despite his apparent astonishment, he accepted my response. The following 4 hours passed quickly as the cabin and its grounds were guarded by Mounties and other law enforcement officials, and I received medical attention and non-processed cheese chip meals. I did my best to respond to their inquiries, which they asked me around a dozen times in an attempt to grasp the complete picture. Many of them questioned why I was out at such a late hour, and they were quite appalled when I told them my honest plan. They told me that I kind of helped stop this from occurring to anyone else and weren't harsh about it, which helped me feel less foolish. Now, aside from the discovery of human remains that had been in the cabin for a considerable amount of time, I don't know much about what they discovered there. Apart from Kyle, with whom I am now happily married after a few years, that is what I remember most about the entire experience and what I think about every single day, is how Hardell, the person who attempted to murder me, gazed at me following my observation of the two deceased women behind him. He seemed to know. It was as if he himself had known they were there. I thought she was going to crash into it, but when I looked through the glass and saw that no one was there, I knew the whispering had ceased. I fell to the ground right away and began sobbing once more. This time, however, I was so completely frightened that I kept my gaze fixed on the door. After a minute, I realized she was gone, and I forced myself to glance about the cabin instead of at the windows of the front entrance. I could only make out 4 walls, a bed, a stove, and what I assumed was a couch from what I could see in the darkness. I searched the area next to the stove until I discovered the matchbox I had hoped was there. To obtain some light and warmth close to me, I fired one up right away. I just sat and stared at the flame till I calmed down, not even using it to look around. I lighted another match when the first one went out, but this time I looked at it with its light. Regarding the cabin, I recall hearing my own small, amusing coo when I noticed an electric lantern. To fill the cabin with a soft white glow, I removed it from a wall and switched it on. In the light, I could see that the cottage had a loft and was, in fact, rather new but small. As I had hoped, there was a couch as well. It appeared cozy. I took a seat on the couch for a moment. I was still gathering my bearings and figuring things out, but when I noticed that there was wood in the stove, I got up a moment later to light a fire. A smaller bundle of kindling was included with each of the approximately 4 bundles that had already been cut into little planks large enough to fit inside the stove. I lighted one with a match after tossing it into the stove. I kept searching until the cabin warmed up and discovered a small closet that appeared to be a pantry. When I opened it and saw a large coat hanging on the hanger along with a large pack of water bottles, a kettle, some coffee, and a bag of cheeses, I nearly started crying again. Before I saw the bag, I had no idea how hungry I had been. I quickly grabbed it and ate a bunch. I sat down to feast on the cheeses after putting on the coat and turning on the kettle for some coffee. Although I didn't know who owned this lodge, I was really considering how I could pay them back for what I had stolen. I was so ecstatic when the coffee reached my tongue that I nearly forgot about the weird whisper lady. For the same reasons, I also felt incredibly foolish once more. I jumped and spilled coffee on myself when a loud thud slammed into the door. I suppose she was still aware of me. I yelled at the door that I needed to stay there because I was lost. Till dawn. She scared me, I said, but I apologized for keeping her out. I heard the unmistakable hint of leave in return. It was too dark, so I told her I couldn't. In response, the door simply pounded once more. All of this made me feel terrible because, obviously, I wasn't supposed to be present. What was I going to do, though? Simply perish from exposure? I really thought she was going to knife me or something, but the way she was acting made me want to let her in. Nor was I certain that this was her cabin, I thought. Why hadn't she unlocked the door if it was? The large coat was obviously for a guy, and there was no key on the hook. No, I wasn't letting her in since she was also being really strange. The woman eventually moved away from the door, taking her whispered mumble with her. For more time than I can recall, I sat and gazed at the door, praying she wouldn't return. I consumed the whole bag of cheeses and a bottle of water, followed by a period of nursing coffee, although she never did. I finally yawned and realized I was exhausted, just as the bundle of fire I had thrown into the oven had burned to embers. After locking the stove and placing another bundle inside, I turned to face the ladder that led to the loft. I had hoped to locate a mattress, or at least a bed of some sort, up there. I smirked when I spotted a mattress with a pillow and blanket at the top of the ladder, but I stopped. I saw movement in the corner at that moment. Fearing that the insane woman had gotten inside, I hurriedly raised my lamp to gain a better view. However, the light fell on a different woman. This woman was wearing only her panties and had blonde hair. She was shivering in the corner with her back to me. I was so taken aback by this new woman that I nearly passed out, but I was able to keep my composure and cling onto the ladder. I felt terrible that she had been lurking up there the entire time, but I was also afraid since she appeared to shudder at the light. I risked calling out to her, telling her that I was only lost and that everything was fine. I yelled in terror when I saw the woman's face when she turned around in the loft. Her gaze had the same the other woman had, a bloodshot, crazed appearance. The fact that a portion of her cheek was missing, however, was extremely unsettling. I could see her teeth underneath what appeared to be a surgically created hole in her face. Her eyes widened at the sight of me, and she scurried into the other corner. However, I panicked and fell from the ladder because I thought she was approaching me. I fell hard to the ground, but I quickly got up on my hands and knees, walked to the couch, leaned my back against the wall, and shone the light up at the loft. The woman looked over the edge of the loft, peering at me with a horrified expression on her face, the top half of her face illuminated by the faint white lamp. I considered running at that very moment. There was another bang at the door just as I was about to grab the light and the cheesies and simply fly out of the cabin and locate a road. I continued to stare at the woman in the loft, but her gaze kept moving back and forth between the door and me. A whisper came from the other side of the door. "Murder you." What the woman meant by it is unknown to me. Was she saying that the loft woman would kill me, or that she wanted to kill me? The only reason I felt somewhat afraid was that, in either scenario, there wasn't much I could do. The woman whispering from the other side of the door did not move, and the woman in the loft remained exactly where she was. It was my fault that I was stuck. I kept listening to the other woman's whispers and never took my eyes off the blonde in the loft. Most of what she said was inaudible to me, but I just laid there listening and watching and trying not to lose my mind. I don't know how or when I fell asleep, but I did so finally. And I expected to see her in the loft when I woke up the following morning, when the sun was just beginning to rise, but she was not there. As soon as I woke up, I noticed a somewhat ordinary-looking cabin property outside the window. I assumed it would be secure enough to merely slip away throughout the day because nothing about the inside seemed strange or sinister. I put some cash and a note with my name on it for you can replace this text with any text you wish. You can either write in this text box or paste your own text here. Try different languages and voices. Change the speed and the pitch of the voice. You can even tweak the SSML, speech synthesis markup language, to control how the different sections of the text sound. Click on SSML above to give it a try. Enjoy using text-to-speech.